The the train to Burroughs carried mostly freight, 30 narrow cars of it, with 2 passenger cars up front. Running over a superconducting magnetic piste. Thank you for telling me about that word, Purple Wayne, because I think it would have thrown me off in that context, actually. Definitely would have thrown me off. Now I look... Okay, wait, I shouldn't say anything. I would have looked really smart. Damn it. Okay. The train to Burroughs, blah, blah, blah. 2 passenger cars up front, running over a superconducting magnetic piste so quickly and smoothly that it was hard to believe the view. After John's endless plods cross-country and rovers, it was almost frightening. The only thing to do was flood the pleasure centers in the old brain with an Omegendorf. Smoked a fat bowl. And sit back and enjoy it. Looking out at what appeared to be some kind of terrain. Following supersonic flight. The piste had been routed roughly parallel to the 10th north latitude, degree. How do you say latitudes and longitudes? Is it to the 10 degrees north? Got it. Okay. The piste had been routed roughly parallel to the 10-degree north latitude. Eventually, the plan was to ring the planet. But so far, only the hemisphere between Eckes and Burroughs had been finished. Burroughs had become the biggest town in the... Sorry, I have not read this before, so... The piste had been routed roughly parallel to the 10-degree north latitude, to the 10 degrees north latitude. Eventually, the plan was to ring the planet, but so far, only the hemisphere between Eckes and Burroughs had been finished. Burroughs had become the biggest town in the far hemisphere. The original settlement had been built by an American-based consortium, using a French-led EC design, and was located at the upper end of Isidis Planitia, which was in effect a huge trough, where the northern plains made a deep indentation into the southern highlands. The sides and head of the trough counteracted the planet's curvature in such a way that the landscape around the town had something like Terran horizons. And as the train flew down the great trough, Boone could see across mesa-dotted dark plains to horizons some 60 kilometers away. Usually the horizon is much closer than that on Mars. Burroughs' buildings were almost all cliff dwellings, cut into the sides of 5 low mesas, which were grouped together on a rise in the bend of an ancient curving channel. Looks flat to me. Which were grouped together on a rise in the bend of an ancient curving channel. Big sections of the mesa's vertical sides had been filled by mirrored glass. Rectangles of mirrored glass. As if postmodern skyscrapers had been turned on their sides and shoved into the hills. A startling sight, in fact. and far more impressive than Underhill or even Akis Overlook, which had a great view but could not be seen. No, the glass-sided mesas of Burroughs, on their rise over a channel that seemed to be begging for water, with a view out to distant hills. These features combined to give the new town a quickly growing reputation as the most beautiful city on Mars. Its western train station was inside one of the excavated mesas, a glass-walled room 60 meters high. John stepped out into this grand space and made his way through the crowds of people. Head craned back like a hick in Manhattan. Train crews were dressed in blue jumpers. Prospecting teams in Walker green. Unoma bureaucrats in suits. Construction workers in work jumpers. Colored like rainbows to suggest sportswear. Unoma headquarters had been located in Burrough 3 years before, and that had caused a real building boom. It was a close thing whether there were more Unoma bureaucrats or construction workers in the station. At the far end of the great room, John found a subway entrance and took a little subway car to the Unoma headquarters. In the car, he shook hands with a few people who recognized and approached him, feeling the old weirdness of the fishbowl return. He was back among strangers in a city. That night, he had dinner with Helmut Bronski. They had met many times before, and John was impressed by the man. A German millionaire who had gotten into politics. Tall, beefy, blonde and red-faced, impeccably groomed, dressed in an expensive gray suit. He had been the EEC's Minister of Finance when he took the Unoma post. Now he told John the latest news in a very urbane British English, eating roast beef and potatoes rapidly between bursts of sentences, holding his silverware in the workmanlike German fashion. We are going to award a prospecting contract in Elysium to the Transnational Consortium Armscorps. They will be shipping up their own equipment. But Helmut, John said, won't that violate the Mars Treaty? Helmut made a wide gesture with the hand holding the fork. They were the men of the world, his look said. They understood these kinds of things. The treaty is superannuated. This is obvious to everyone dealing with the situation. Superannuated, retired because of age or infirmity, too old for use, work, service, or position. You're welcome, chat. New word. The treaty is superannuated. This is obvious to everyone dealing with the situation. But its scheduled revision is 10 years away. In the meantime, we have to try to anticipate certain aspects of the revision. That's why we give some concessions now. There's no rational reason to delay, and if we tried, there would be trouble in the General Assembly. But the General Assembly can't be happy that you've given the first concession to an old South African weapons manufacturer. Helmut shrugged. Armscor has very little relation to its origins. It is just a name. When South Africa became Azania, the company moved its home offices to Australia and then to Singapore. And now, of course, it has become much more than an aerospace firm. It is a true transnational. One of the new tigers with banks of its own. And controlling interest in about 50 of the old Fortune 500. 50 of them? John said. Yes. And Armscor is one of the smallest of the transnationals. That is why we picked it. But it still has a bigger economy than any but the largest 20 countries. As the old multinationals coalesce into transnationals, you see, they really gather quite a bit of power, and they have influence in the General Assembly. When we give one a concession, some 20 or 30 countries profit by it, and get their opening on Mars. And for the rest of the countries, that serves as precedent. And so pressure on us is reduced. Uh-huh. John thought it over. Tell me, who negotiated this agreement? Well, it was a number of us, you know. Helmut ate on, serenely ignoring John's steady gaze. John pursed his lips, looked away. He understood suddenly that he was talking with a man who, though a functionary, yet considered himself to be vastly more important on the planet than Boone. Genial, smooth-faced, and who cut his hair? Bronski leaned back and ordered them after-dinner drinks. His assistant, their waitress for the evening, scurried off to oblige. There's a hair in my drink. Hold on. I don't believe I've been waited on before on Mars, John observed. Helmut met his gaze calmly, but his beefy color had heightened. John almost smiled. The Unoma factor wanted to seem menacing. The representative of powers so sophisticated that John's little weather station mentality couldn't even comprehend them. But John had found in the past that a few minutes of his first man on Mars routine was usually enough to crush that kind of attitude. And so he laughed and drank and told tales and alluded to secrets only the first 100 were privy to, and made it clear to the assistant waitress that he was the one in command at the table, and so on. Behaving in general in an unconcerned, knowing, arrogant manner. And by the time they were finished with their sherbet and brandy, Bronski was loud and blustery himself, clearly nervous and on the defensive. Hello, John Lee. and by the time they were finished with their sherbet and brandy, Bronski was loud and blustery himself, clearly nervous and on the defensive. Functionaries. John had to laugh. But he was curious concerning the ultimate point of their conference, which still wasn't clear to him. Perhaps Bronski had wanted to see in person how news of the new concession would affect one of the first 100, perhaps to gauge the reaction of the rest. That would be silly, for to get a good gauge on the first 100, you would need to poll 80 of them at least. But that didn't mean it wasn't true. John was used to being taken for a representative of things, for a symbol. The figurehead again. It could definitely be a waste of time. He wondered if he could salvage something of his own from the evening. And as they were walking back to his guest suite, he said, "Have you ever heard of the coyote? An animal?" He grinned, left it at that. In his room, he lay on his bed, Mangalavid on the TV, thinking things over, brushing his teeth before going to sleep. He looked his mirror image in the eye and scowled. He waved his toothbrush in the expansive gesture. "Well," he said in an unfair parody of Helmut's slight accent, "this is business, you know? Business as usual." Well, this is business. Business as usual. Wave at toothbrush. Very good, very good. Okay, 3 more pages. There's a natural break. The next morning, he had a few hours before his first meeting, and so he spent time with Pauline, going over what he could find out about Helmut Bronski's doings in the last 6 months. Could Pauline get into the Unoma diplomatic pouch? Had Helmut ever been to Senzanina or any of the other sabotage sites? My leg is asleep. Could Pauline get into the Unoma diplomatic pouch? Had Helmut ever been to Senzanina or any of the other sabotage sites? While Pauline ran through her search algorithms, John swallowed an Omegendorf to kill his hangover and thought about what lay behind this inspiration to search Helmut's records. Thank you, Maybe the Green, for 44 months. 17 in a row. And thought about what lay behind this inspiration to search Helmut's records. Unoma constituted the ultimate authority on Mars these days, at least according to the letter of the law. In practice, as last night had made clear. It had the UN's usual toothlessness before national armies and transnational money. Unless it did their bidding, it was helpless. It could not succeed against their desires, and probably would never even try. Toothless and ruthless, as it was their tool. Unless it did their bidding, it was helpless. It could not succeed against their desires, and probably would never even try, as it was their tool. So what did they want? The national governments and the transnational board of directors. If enough sabotages occurred, would that constitute a reason to bring in more of their own security? Would it tend to increase their control? He made a disgusted noise. Apparently, the only result of his investigation so far was that the list of suspects had tripled. Pauline said, "Excuse me, John." And the information came up on her screen. The diplomatic pouch, she had found, was coded in one of the new unbreakable encryptions. You'd have to get the decryptions to enter it. Helmut's movements, on the other hand, were easily traceable. He had been to Pythagoras, the mirror station that had been spun out of orbit 10 weeks ago, and to Senzani Na, 2 weeks before John's visit. And yet, no one at Senzani Na had mentioned his appearance. Most recently, he had just returned from the mining complex being set up at a place called Bradbury Point. Bradbury Point. 2 days later, John left to visit it. Thank you, Scotty B, for 38 months. Sorry, I thought I could mute my alerts, but apparently I can't. Shh, chat, it's book club. Bradbury Point, perhaps named after Ray, was located some 800 kilometers north of Burroughs. At the easternmost extension of the Niloceratus mensae. Niloceratus mensae. Wingardium Leviosa. At the easternmost extension of the Niloceratus mensae. The mensae were a series of long mesas. Of long mesas, like islands of the southern highlands, standing out in the shallows of the northern plains. The island of mesas of Niloceratus had recently been found to be rich in metallogenic had recently been found to be a rich metallogenic province with deposits of copper, silver, zinc, gold, platinum, and other metals. Concentrations of ore like this had been discovered in several locations on the so-called Great Escarpment. Great Escarpment, where the southern highlands drop to the northern lowlands. Some areologists were going so far as to label the entire escarpment region a metallogenic province, banding the planet like the stitching on a baseball. It was another odd fact to add to the great North-South mystery, and a fact that was, of course, getting more than its share of attention. Excavations accompanied by intensive aerological studies were being conducted by scientists working for UNOMA, and John discovered as he checked new arrivals' employment records, excavations accompanied by intensive aerological studies were being conducted by scientists working for UNOMA, and John discovered as he checked new arrivals' employment records, the transnationals. All trying to find clues that would enable them to locate more deposits. But even on Earth, the geology of mineral formation was not well understood, which was why prospecting still had large elements of chance in it. And on Mars, it was more mysterious yet. The recent finds on the Great Escarpment had mostly been an accident, and only now was the region becoming the main focus for prospecting. Oh my god, 3 pages is so much longer than I realized. I didn't know there'd be so many big words in 3 pages, guys. I'm gonna read for 2 more minutes. I've been going since like 11:40, so I've been reading for like an hour. Minus peeing. Loving it though. Thank you. I can do it. Do you really mean it? Okay. The discovery of Bradbury Point Complex had accelerated this hunt, as it was turning out to be as big as the largest Terran complexes, perhaps the equal of the Bushveld complex of Azania. Isn't that what the company or whatever? Or South Africa? Perhaps the equal of the Bushveld complex of Azania. So, a gold rush in Nilosyrtis, and Helmut Bronsky had visited the scene. Which turned out to be small and utilitarian, a mere beginning. A rickover and some refineries. Next to a mesa hollowed out and filled by a habitat. The mines were scattered in the lowlands between the mesas. Boone drove up to the habitat coupled to the garage, then ducked through the locks. Inside, a welcoming committee greeted him and took him up to a window-walled conference room to talk. There were, they said, about 300 people in Bradbury, all employees of UNOMA, and trained by the transnational Shalalco. Shalalco. When they took John on a brief tour, he found they were a mix of ex-South Africans, Australians, and Americans, all happy to shake his hand. About 3/4 men, pale and clean, looking more like lab techs than the blackened trolls John envisioned when he heard the word miner. Most of them were working on 2-year contracts, they told him, and keeping track of the time they had left by the week or even by the day. They ran the mines mostly by teleoperation and looked shocked when Boone asked to go down into a mine for a look around. "It's just a hole," one said. Boone stared at them innocently, and after another moment's hesitation, they scrambled to gather an escort team to take him out. It took them 2 hours to get into walkers and out of the lock. They drove to the rim of a mine, and then down a ramp road into a terraced oval pit some 2 kilometers long. There they got out and followed John as he walked around. Surrounded by big robotic dozers and dump trucks and earth movers, his 4 escorts' faceplates were all eyes. On alert for a behemoth on the loose, John guessed. It's the Amazon mines. Amazon warehouse mines. On the alert for a behemoth on the loose, John guessed. He stared at them, amazed at their timidity. It made him realize all of a sudden that Mars could just be another version of the hardship assignment. Yeah, why don't they call them Mars movers? Mars could be just another version of the hardship assignment. A hellish combination of Siberia, the interior of Saudi Arabia, the South Pole in winter, and Novi Mir. The hardship assignment. Or else, they just thought he was a dangerous man to be around, which gave him a start. Everyone had no doubt heard of the falling dump truck. Maybe it was just that. But could it be something more? Might these people be aware of something he isn't? Reflecting on this for a while, John found his eyes beginning to press glass. He had been thinking of the falling truck as an accident, or at least something that could only happen once. But his movements were easy to trace. Everyone knew where he was. And every time you went outdoors, you were only a walker away, as they said. And in a pit mine, there were a lot of behemoths about. But they got back without incident. And that night they had the usual dinner and party in his honor. A hard drinking party, with a lot of Omegendorf consumption and loud raucous talk. A bunch of young, tough engineers pleased to find that John Boone was actually a fun guy to party with. A fairly common reaction among newcomers, especially younger men. John chatted them up and had a good time, and slipped his inquiries into the flow pretty unnoticeably, he thought. They had not heard of the coyote, which was interesting, as they did not know about Big Man and the hidden colony. Apparently, the coyote was not in that category of tale. Sorry. They had not heard about the coyote, which was interesting, as they did know about Big Man and the hidden colony. Apparently, the coyote was not in that category of tale. He was some kind of insider thing, known, so far as John could tell, only to the first 100. The miners had had a recent unusual visit, however. An Arab caravan had come by, traveling the edge of Vestidas Borealis, and they said the Arabs had claimed to have been visited by some of the lost colonists, as they called them. Interesting, John said. It seemed unlikely to him that Hiroko or any of her crew would reveal themselves, but who could tell? Only to some of the first 100. It seemed unlikely to him that Hiroko or any of her crew would reveal themselves, but who could tell? He might as well go check it out. After all, there was only so much he could do at Bradbury Point. Very little detective work, he was noticing, could be accomplished before a crime occurred. So he spent a couple more days observing the mining, but that told him little. It only reinforced his shock at the scale of the operation, at how much robotic earth movers could tear away. "What are you going to do with all the metal?" he asked after taking a look down into another great open pit mine, located 25 kilometers to the west of the habitat. "Getting it to Earth will cost more than it's worth, right?" The chief of operations, a black-haired man with a hatchet face, grinned. "The spice must flow. We'll hold on to it until it's worth more. Or until they build that space elevator." "You believe in that?" "Oh yeah, the materials are there. Graphite whisker reinforced with diamond spirals. Why, you could almost build one on Earth with that. Here, it would be easy." John shook his head. That afternoon, they drove for an hour back to the habitat, past raw pits and slag heaps, toward the distant plume of the refineries on the other sides of the habitat mesa. He was used to seeing the land torn up for building purposes. But this, it was amazing what a few hundred people could do. Of course, it was the same technology that was allowing Sachs to build a vertical town the whole height of the Eckes Overlook. The same technology that allowed all the new towns to be built so quickly. But still, wreaking such havoc just to strip away metals destined for Earth's insatiable demand. ... The next day, he gave the operations chief a fiendishly tight security regimen to be followed for 2 months, and then drove out into the wind-eroded tracks of the Arab caravan and followed them north and east. Thank you. I did it. I fucking did it, guys. Thank you. I'm really, really enjoying John Boone's, like, noir era. John Boone, first man on Mars, first detective on Mars.